I'm Claire Bali, and I am a freshman theology major currently living in Southern California. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to paint some watercolor flowers. First things first, let's get started with the materials you're going to need to paint these flowers. First of all, you're going to need a brush. I'm using this one. It's the only one I use the entire time I'm painting. You can see that the tip is fairly thin and it's quite bendable. This is important because it lets you vary the width of your strokes while you're painting. Next thing that you're going to need is some watercolor paper. I'm using a fairly small one. Watercolor paper is important because it is thick enough that the water won't bleed through it. If you use something like printer paper or sketching paper, it might be too thin. So I recommend either using watercolor paper or maybe a multimedia paper. Just make sure that it's fairly thick. The third thing that you're gonna need is watercolor paints. I have these ones right here, and they're in little trays like this. You don't need expensive watercolors. They can be fairly cheap. Most watercolors I find are fairly similar. The last two things you're gonna need are some paper towels or a regular towel and a cup of water. That's for rinsing out your brush in between colors so that you don't mix it and get a weird color. So once you have all of these materials set up, it's time to start painting. So I'm going to be painting 3 different types of flowers. For this first type of flower, I'm going to start with yellow. You can start with whatever color you want, but I find it easiest to start with the petals of this flower and then do the center afterwards. So what you want to do with your brush is you take the very tip of the brush. You can see how that is pretty pointy at the end. You're going to start, and then as you go on the stroke, you apply more pressure and then lift your hand up, and you keep doing this all the way around the flower. Sometimes it's easier if you start on one end and go to the opposite end, so that makes your petals more even. You want to do this first one kind of light. If you do it too dark, then it's hard to add other layers of color. So we're gonna let this dry for a little bit. It's a lot easier with watercolor. You have to let something dry before you can paint anything over it, or else the colors will all bleed together. So I'm gonna continue. We're gonna be painting a couple different versions of this flower because it's fun to get some different angles. So for this one, we're gonna do a kind of twisted angle flower. You're gonna kind of imagine the center here. I like to draw a couple little lines. For this flower, since it's angled, you're gonna make the leaves, or not the leaves, the petals on the bottom longer, and then the ones on the top are gonna be shorter because of the angle that the flower is at. And then we're gonna go in with our third version of this flower, and that one's gonna be completely to the side. So I kind of like to start with the side petals here. So I'm taking that same color that I used before, and you can't see it on camera, but I'm gonna mix it with a little bit of orange. Okay, so there's that one. I'm gonna do the same on the other ones. Okay, so now that we have the darker petals on all of our flowers, I'm gonna go back, always starting with this one because it's the most dry currently, and I'm gonna add the centers. For the side flowers, this is going to be more of an oval shape than a circle because the flower's angled, and so you're not gonna be able to see the center straight on like you would in this first flower. For the third angle, it's actually going to be more of a dome shape. I like to add some leaves, so I'm going to be using a light green, and you're going to use somewhat of the same technique as the petals with the paintbrush. I usually take the brush, like I said, with a really fine tip and make something like that. Okay, so now that first layer's done, I'm going to go back and do what I did before, adding some extra dimension with a darker green. I'm going to show you a couple more types of flowers that you can paint. Okay, so moving on to the second type of flower, I'm going to do a very light pink with this flower. I get this pink by mixing a little bit of red paint and quite a bit of white paint. So you're going to start with your brush right in the middle. You're gonna make a kind of a little oval shape like that, and you're gonna start with your paintbrush going around and making little like curved shapes around this oval. I like to leave a little bit of space between them because then when it's finished you can see the definition of the petals a little bit more easily. So once you have a shape that's relatively even and still pretty small like this, you're not going to put any more around the top, and instead you're going to only focus on putting curves right around here on the bottom half of the flower. I'm actually adding more red to the paint that I was using previously. This is going to make it darker. You don't really have to add the second layer in any specific way to your flower. Putting it somewhere along maybe an edge of the petal or something where you can still see that lighter color. For this one, I like to add a stem, and I also like to use a darker color of green than I did for our last flower. So here's my green, and I am going to go in and make a stem, not pushing too hard on my brush. And then I'm going in and I'm making little leaves. And then if you want, like I'm going to do, you can add a little leaf. So there you have it for our second flower. Now I'm going to move on to the third. So this one is going to look somewhat like a half circle. I'm just going to start putting petals. I kind of space them out first in the shape that I want, and then I go back in and I'm just going to fill this out. And then we're going to wait for this to dry. Now that our first two flowers are nearly dry, I'm going to go back in, mix that same turquoise color that I was using with a little bit of a dark blue, or you can mix it with a purple. And we're going to use less water this time so that it has sharper edges. And then you're going to do second layer of petals. I like to make the tops of these petals kind of in between the ones I did before. That's our base for these blue flowers. I'm also going to add some stems and leaves to this one. So I'm going to take my green and I'm going to make a little group of leaves right there at the base of these. And then taking that same green, I'm going to make some thin stems. And then I'm also going to add some little leaves. Okay, so now that the tops of our flowers are dry, I'm going to go back in with one last detail. I'm going to take a fairly dark blue. So you want to make sure that it's not too watery so that it doesn't bleed. And I like to make some little lines that come right out of the top. And then I'm going to make some little dots right at the top. Okay, and there we have our third type of flower. Alright, so here are the finished products. I think they're super cute. You can use them for so many different things. One thing that I really like using watercolors for is to make these cute little postcards. For a postcard, this is a relatively small one. There's lots of different sizes you can make, but the back looks like this. This is where you write your message, this is the address, and this is where you put the stamp. And I think they're super cute. I know we can all text each other, we can FaceTime, talk over Instagram, but I think that getting a handwritten note from a friend or family member is really meaningful, especially in these times that can be a little bit stressful. Thank you so much for watching this, and I hope that you try it at home.